To understand where we are today, you got to understand where we had been
Sure.
one time. We have in our archives, we have pictures of advertisements from the 30s, some of the billboards, and the most expensive piece of advertising in the world on Times Square where the ball
Oh wow. Yeah.
drops. We have pictures of advertising at the top of that. Four Roses Bourbon. Down below that was one of them was Planters Peanuts. Down Coca-Cola. You see Coke
Yeah.
up at the top now, but that's in our heyday.
I think
Four
I've seen
Roses
that in the
Bourbon.
book. I think
Now
I saw
you've
that in
probably
that
seen
book.
it in the
Yeah.
book, and probably the most recognized photograph in the entire world at the end of World War II, where the sailors kissing the nurse in
Mm-hmm.
Times Square.
Yep.
Now, usually it's focused right on them, but there's some photographs. We have one here, but pan back a little bit. At the top is the Four Roses at the top there, and so that's at the end of World War II. We're still number one. So to understand what happened, and Four Roses Bourbon had such a tremendous reputation. The name was renowned, and it was destroyed. And we have to tell the history to tell people, hey, we're not blended whiskey. This is a genuine Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey.
Absolutely.
This is the number one selling bottle in many Western European countries, Japan, and now it's back home. And our focus has been really on premium brands, single barrel and small batch, realizing and hoping really that people would pick up on this and say, hey, this is really good bourbon.
Absolutely.
And although the focus hasn't been on this at all, the sales of our yellow label are doubling and tripling every year since we've been back because people
So
have
even
been
though
realized.
you're really pushing, maybe the small batch or maybe the single barrel, you're finding because of that the connotation with this yellow label, it's all rising up. You're seeing your sales grow.
That was our
label.
intent, and
Absolutely.
what's what we hoped it would happen, and that's what's happening.
Well, I review the yellow label, and I think the yellow label is an outstanding product. It's sub $20. I mean, if you're going
Yeah,
to
absolutely.
sit at home and pour a glass of whiskey, pop a couple cubes of ice in it, if you're going to drink it any way you want to, mix it with Coke, mix it with 7 Up, mix it with whatever you wish. So I read somewhere where you said that if you're at home and relaxing and hanging out, you might reach for that one before you reach for anything else. Is that still maybe the case?
Yeah,
I
mean, I drank as much of this as any of our bourbons,
Absolutely.
and it's either neat. And we had a billboards in Kentucky a few years ago when people doing tasting events all the time. People come up, started coming up, and it was always interesting. Still is when I go to new states. We'd start off slow, and by the end of the night, people coming back and saying, "Wow, this is unbelievable."
Yep.
And people often would ask me, "Well, when you're blending, when you're making mixed drinks, how do you make it?" And first time somebody asked me that, I mean, it just popped out. I mean, within about a half a second, I said, "What does improve the taste of ice?"
Yes. Yeah.
So when I drink it, it's either neat or with just a little ice,
Yep.
and it's absolutely fabulous.
Absolutely.
I found over the years when a lot of times I'll be asked to do a bar event, maybe a guest bartender, or I'm out talking to people. I'm there for several hours, and I don't want to walk around with a Diet Coke in my hand. People think I'm drinking Diet Coke, and so I want to drink in my hand. I drink it, sip it very, very slowly. But I started, I said, well, this is 80 proof. I better, because our single barrel is 100 proof, which most people would guess it closer to 80 proof than 100 proof.
Mm-hmm.
But this is 80 proof, and I said,
smooth.
well, I better, I've got a long night ahead of me. I better drink this.
Sure.
I had to go back to one of the others to make sure that, because this went down like water after a couple drinks. It's so smooth and mellowness, and we want that smoothness, mellowness in all of our brands.
Yeah.
But with 80 proof, it's just unbelievable. And I had to go back to a little higher strength, so I made sure that I'm realizing I don't have water in my hand.
You've got something a little bit more powerful than
exactly,
that. Absolutely.
Yeah.
You better be careful with it.
Right.
In terms of bourbon, I get asked a lot of times, and who better to take this opportunity to ask a master distiller here? What are the flavor I mean, you've got the flavor factors that go into making bourbon what it is. I mean, obviously the grain, you've got the fermentation and yeast and so forth. You've got the water that actually makes up all this, the wood itself, proof, all these things. What do you, I mean, when you're thinking about these components, are there two or three that really shoot out? I mean, you've set up your brand where you guys have a distinct, couple of distinct grain recipes, some distinct yeast, but outside of those two things, so obviously you're keying in on those. What other things really go into your thinking when you're crafting an end product here, or have a desire to put something out like these, the yellow label and the small batch and so forth?
Okay, we get, you're right. Flavors have developed in the mashing process. When you mashing is cooking the grains, and once the grains have been cooked or mashed, during the process you add malted barley, and the malted barley in the bourbon industry is primarily there for the conversion process. We get our flavors in other ways, unlike scotches. Excuse me.
No problem.
So we use some malted barley. We use a lot of rye grain we talked about earlier, and we're using that malt. It's like if we've got to make alcohol. Alcohol is all made in fermentation. You only need three things. Now you need water, yeast, and the yeast is a living organism, so you need a food source, which is sugar. You need three things. Now, if you look at the chemical process in single space every chemical equation, you may reach from the ceiling on a piece of paper single spaced, ceiling down to the floor. There's a lot taking place, but that's the three ingredients. So we need sugar. Now we're starting off with starches, like corn is a starch, rye is a starch, wheat is a starch. And if you take a bite of a starch like a potato or a piece of bread, as soon as that starch hits your mouth, the enzymes in your mouth break that starch molecule, the molecular chain, down to a small molecule, which is sugar for our nutrients for our bodies.
Yeah.
That's why it's why a diabetic has to be careful of the starch intake as well as sugar, because that starch is converted. Malted barley acts as close to the enzymes in your mouth as any other. You can malt any grain, but malted barley does the best job in breaking the starch down to sugar for fermentation.
Okay.
So then we have the 5 yeast, and the 5 yeast with our 2 different grain recipes, and when we end up with 10 unique recipes, each having their own unique flavor, aging in barrels, there's an infinite number of ways you can pull those out and mingle or blend them to achieve different flavors. But even with all that, so you get the flavor from the yeast. The water source is very important. We could do the same thing exactly. We could pick this distillery and move it up on the other side of town with wild turkey, and pick wild turkey, move it here, do everything the same, except wild turkey wouldn't taste the same with this water source. We wouldn't taste the same with that water source.
Right.
So water sources are unique. We have a good water source, very high limestone, good water source. And then the barrel itself, and just like any of the variables, there's the number of staves in the barrel, the depth of the char, the positioning of the barrels. But we know by studies over the years that bourbon as a category, about 66% of the total flavor comes from the natural sugar in the white oak brand new barrel that we all use. We've experimented with other
I have
barrels.
got some from today's tasting. I can, lifting that barrel up, and as we were looking at doing the barrel selection, I pulled it up and I happened to sign my name on that section of barrel, and the sugar content from that barrel. I mean, it smells like it's like maple syrup. I mean, it's so heavenly smelling stuff.
Like the vanilla, the caramel, the maple syrup, and you get different flavors in different barrels. And but it's a combination, and that's why with no 2 barrels ever alike, you really it's Mother Nature's.
Sure.
We begin monitoring every barrel in inventory. We have close to 380,000 at 3 years age. We'll monitor them until the time that they reach the peak of their performance, and we try to use them. I'm trying to think of where we're
just flavor factor in general.
They're all going to be different.
Yeah.
So how do you achieve consistency, which we use with the 10 flavors? We still can't be exactly consistent. But we have that ability to every bottle we have a label on. It's going to be different.
To vary that.
Exactly. And so we have the abilities, and we're not just dependent on. We use most of our barrels are heavy char #4, but you get different char levels depending on the length of burn inside that barrel to char the barrel, and it's going to give different flavors. Charring the barrel will generate the color. Bourbon's 100% natural. All the color comes from the char on that.
Those two right there.
Comes from the char of the barrel. But the charring of the barrel also opens the pores of the wood to allow the interaction of liquid in the barrel with the natural sugars, and that's how it picks up the natural sugars.
Absolutely.
And the age, bourbon will generally, most people will tell you that distillers will peak. You fill a barrel, it begins a pretty steep curve, like on a bell curve, picking up flavor, color pretty quickly. And bourbon will generally peak around 6 to 8 years, and then it will trail off really slow. Okay. And you get some really good exceptions, but there are exceptions to that norm of 6 to 8 years.
Gotcha.
It's unlike Scotch, but Scotch uses our barrels, used barrels every time. We always have to use a brand new barrel. By the time we finish, all or most of the sugar has been expended. It's going to take a lot longer to generate flavor, and the difference in the climate of Scotland versus the U.S. That's a very important factor. But it takes a lot longer to age Scotch to be equivalent maturity, say, to a 6-year-old bourbon.